Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a topic that I think a lot of us can relate to. We've got a really interesting collection of stuff here. Articles, blog posts, even a YouTube video, all asking the same question: can Instagram Reels be addictive?
Yeah, it's a big question, and one that we're hearing more and more. What we're hoping to do today is, well, we're going to break down why these short videos are so engaging, and then hopefully give you the tools to kind of figure out your own relationship with Reels.
Exactly. And you know what's crazy? People are spending like 1 to 2 hours every day just watching these things. That's like, what, 200, 300 Reels a day?
Wow. I mean, that really shows you how much they've become like a part of our lives.
Like, we don't even think about it anymore. Speaking of not thinking, one of the articles you sent over talked about this thing called the hook model from a book called Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products. It's about how products like Instagram Reels are built to, like, keep us coming back.
Oh yeah, Nir Alal, he's kind of the expert on this stuff. So think about, the last time you opened Instagram, right? Was it because you got a notification?
Hmm.
Or were you just, bored, maybe a little anxious, looking for a quick distraction?
Oh, all the time. That little red notification dot is like instant Reels time. But sometimes it's just like I'm stressed and I just automatically reach for my phone.
Yeah, and that's Alal's triggers. They can be external, like you said, the notifications,
Hmm.
or internal, those feelings, when you just want a quick escape.
It's true. But then what? What happens after the trigger?
Well, then, you act. You open the app, start scrolling. That's the action phase of the hook model. Super simple.
Yeah. And often before you know it, you spent way more time than you meant to.
Right, and that brings us to the variable reward. This is where it gets really interesting. That feeling of like anticipation, What am I going to see next? Is it going to be funny, informative, shocking? It's like a slot machine in your pocket.
I never thought of it like that, but it's so true. You just keep scrolling, waiting for that next hit of, I don't know, dopamine.
Exactly. And then the more you engage with the reels, like your profile, your followers, maybe you even start creating your own content. That's the investment phase.
Oh, yeah, I totally get that. Even just spending time, like, picking the perfect profile picture or writing my bio makes me feel more connected to the app somehow.
Exactly. You're putting a part of yourself into it. And
Yeah.
that makes you want to come back. It's a cycle.
So far we've talked about how Reels can kind of hook us, but how do we know if it's gone too far? Like, how do we know if it's actually a problem?
Yeah, that's a good question. One of the big ones is like if you start to feel anxious or restless when you can't check the app, like a physical craving.
It's like I need to scroll, even when I know there's nothing new to see.
It's that FOMO, fear of missing out.
Ugh, yeah. And then there's, well, spending more time on it than you plan. I mean, I've definitely lost hours to those things. You just like, I'll watch a couple of Reels, and then suddenly it's been an hour.
I know, right? That slippery slope.
Mhm.
And what's worse is when you start like neglecting other things, putting off work, chores, even just taking care of yourself, all because you're glued to your phone.
And then you start, like, choosing Instagram over real life stuff, like hanging out with your friends, spending time with your family.
Exactly. And of course, there's a constant checking for notifications. You probably don't have any, but you can't resist that little red dot.
It's like it has some kind of magnetic pull.
It's crazy. And then, of course, you can't forget about like the comparisons. You see all these perfect lives, perfect bodies, perfect everything. And it's so easy to start feeling bad about yourself.
Yeah, it's like everyone else is living their best life, and you're just stuck scrolling. But the thing is, it's not always our fault.
That's an important point. There are like bigger things at play here. It's not just about personal responsibility. Our environment plays a huge role.
You mean like our workplace?
Exactly. Nir Eyal talks about this thing called the cycle of responsiveness. It's like we have all these expectations at work, all this pressure to be constantly available, and we have very little control over our time.
I totally feel that. It's like this constant pressure to be on.
Yeah, and it can make you crave control in other areas of your life. So you turn to like Reels for a quick escape, a way to zone out.
So it's not just me being lazy or lacking willpower. It's like a natural response to the way we're expected to work and live these days.
Exactly. It's a much bigger picture. That's something we're going to keep exploring in the next part of our conversation.
Okay, so we've talked about how even our work environment can make us want to escape, reach for those Reels. But where do we go from here? Like, how do we actually start taking back our time, our attention?
That's the real question, right? And the sources you sent, well, they have some pretty practical ideas. We already talked about those internal triggers, but remember surfing the urge. like riding a wave.
Right, acknowledging the urge instead of fighting it.
Exactly. But try this next time before you just give in. Set a timer, like 10 minutes. A lot of times that urge just goes away on its own.
So you're not saying ignore it, but just kind of delay it. Prove you're in control.
Exactly. You got to build up that
This
mental
was-
muscle. But managing those internal triggers, that's only one part. We got to make time for the good stuff too. What AL calls traction, the things that, actually matter to us.
One of the sources was really big on this thing called time boxing. Sounds kind of intense, though, like scheduling your whole day down to the minute.
It can seem like a lot, I know. But think of it as a roadmap. Like you decide how you want to spend your time instead of it just happening to you.
Okay, so less about, like, restriction, more about actually being in charge.
Right. You start by figuring out what's really important to you.
Yeah.
Spending time with people you love, working on a big project, even just taking care of yourself.
Like picturing your perfect week. If you could design it, how would it look?
Exactly. And then you kind of work backwards. See where you can adjust your schedule, make it more like that ideal week. Little by little.
So it's about those small changes, making them stick.
Right.
But even if I get my time all planned out, there's still those external things, like the notifications, always grabbing my attention.
Oh, I know. We said turning them off helps, but sometimes you need more. The sources mention some pretty cool ways to kind of fight back against those external triggers.
Like what?
Ever heard of website blockers? They're like apps or things for your browser that stop you from going to certain websites for a while. It's like putting those websites in timeout.
That's a good idea. I've definitely wasted way too much time, scrolling when I should be working.
There's also these apps like Self-Control and Forest. They're a little more playful.
Playful, how so?
Well, with Self-Control, you block websites or apps for like a certain amount of time. And even if you try to open them, you can't. You literally can't, even if you restart your computer.
Wow, that sounds serious.
It is, but it works, especially if you procrastinate a lot. And then Forest, that's more like a game. You plant a virtual tree, and if you stay focused, the tree grows. But if you pick up your phone, the tree dies.
That's kind of cool. You get rewarded for, actually doing the work.
Exactly. It's all about finding what works for you. Some people like that competition. Others need something a bit gentler.
I also saw something about a focus friend or focus mate. What's that
wow.
about?
Yeah. Basically, you find someone, maybe a friend or coworker, who also wants to be more focused. You commit to working together for a set time. You could even do it online. It's all about accountability.
Like a workout buddy, but for work.
Exactly. And then there's FocusMate, which is an online platform. It pairs you with a random person who's also working. You tell each other your goals, and you basically work alongside each other, virtually, with your cameras on.
Wow, so even if you don't know them, someone's still watching you work.
It's amazing how much that can help. You're less likely to get distracted.
Speaking of work, you mentioned earlier about getting rid of low-value work. What does that mean exactly?
It's about figuring out what's truly important, what moves you towards your goals, and what's just, busy work. Think about your to-do list. Are there things on there that just suck up your time and energy but don't actually matter that much?
Oh, I'm sure everyone has a few of those lurking around.
Right. And it's not just individual tasks, it's the way you work, too. Are there things you could streamline, automate?
There's so many tools now that can do things for us automatically, freeing up time for the important stuff.
Exactly. It's about working smarter, not harder. And then there's this idea of choosing concentration over being constantly in touch with everyone.
That's such a good point.
Yeah.
These days, it's like we're expected to be available all the time. But you can't do good work if you're constantly being interrupted.
Yeah.
You need those periods of deep focus to be truly productive.
Totally. That's when the real magic happens. You got to make time for those pockets of quiet where you can just focus on one thing. Some people even create tech-free zones in their home or office. No phones, no laptops, nothing.
That's a great idea. Like a little sanctuary for your mind.
Right. And even if you can't do a whole zone, you can still use things to signal that it's focus time. A do not disturb sign, headphones, close your door, anything to show people you need some uninterrupted time.
These are all really helpful. But it feels like a lot to change all at once.
You don't have to do it all at once.
Yeah.
Just pick one or two things that resonate with you and start there. See what works. And be patient, It takes time to build new habits.
It's about progress, not perfection. And speaking of progress, I think it's time to talk about the impact of all this real watching on our health, both mental and physical. That seemed to be a big concern in a lot of the sources.
Yeah, that's the other side of the coin, right? We've talked about the addiction part, but we got to acknowledge the potential downsides too.
I read one article that said excessive reel watching can actually lead to high blood pressure, even in younger people. It's scary.
Yeah, and it's not just physical health. All that stimulation, it can mess with your anxiety, your sleep, even contribute to depression and ADHD.
I've definitely noticed that I feel like more wired and anxious after spending too much time on reels.
It's all that information overload. Our brains weren't built to handle that much that fast. And it's not just the content, it's the design,
Hmm.
the algorithms, the notifications, the endless scrolling. It's all designed to keep you hooked.
So how do we protect ourselves? Is it just a matter of willpower?
Willpower helps, but it's not enough. Remember, these platforms are designed to be addictive. You got to outsmart them, change the game.
So it's more about strategy than just trying to resist.
Exactly. That's where everything we've been talking about comes in. Managing those triggers, making time for the things that matter, setting those boundaries.
So it's about taking back control.
Exactly. And using that control to create a life that actually feels good. A life where technology works for you and not the other way around.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up this part of the conversation, I'm curious, what are some specific tools or tips that have helped you personally? So many great strategies, but yeah, I'm really curious about any specific tools or apps that have helped you.
There's this one that's really good if you're like specifically trying to cut back on reels. It's called a no scroll. Pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I think I've seen a few others that do similar things.
Yeah, there's Be Timeful too. That
Yeah.
one lets you like block certain parts of Instagram, like just the Reels feed or even your whole news feed for however long you want.
So you're not totally off Instagram, but you're like locking the most tempting parts.
Exactly. And if it's YouTube Shorts that get you, there's feedless YouTube.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that. It basically makes YouTube less, well, distracting.
It gets rid of all the extra stuff, even the ads. You can just focus on the videos.
I like that. No more falling down those recommendation rabbit holes. And here's a trick for anyone who's like really serious about avoiding shorts. You can actually downgrade the YouTube app to an older version.
Yeah.
Shorts weren't around back then, so they just like disappear.
That's smart. But what about parents? If they're worried about their kids and all this stuff, it's not always easy to just take away their phones.
A few of the articles mentioned parental control apps like MobiSip. They let you set limits on like which apps your kids can use and for how long.
Yeah, those can be a lifesaver. It's tough being a parent these days, trying to keep up with all this tech stuff.
It's all about finding a balance, right?
Absolutely. And even with all these tools and strategies, it's not like, quick fix. You got to find what works for you. Experiment a bit and be patient with yourself. It takes time.
Progress, not perfection, right?
Exactly. We all have different things that trigger us, different things that help us stay focused. The important thing is to be, curious. Figure out what works for you and be kind to yourself if you, slip up.
It's okay to ask for help too. If you're feeling overwhelmed, talk to someone. A friend, family member, maybe even a therapist.
Yeah, there are people who care about you, people who want to help. You don't have to go through this alone.
This has been such a great conversation. I feel like I have a much better understanding of, how all this works. And more importantly, I feel like I can actually do something about it.
Yeah, and the main thing is like remembering that you're in control. You get to decide how you want to use technology, how you want it to fit into your life.
If we could sum up everything we've talked about today, what would be the key takeaway?
I'd say Instagram Reels, they can be fun, but you got to understand how they work, how they can, hook you in. That's the first step to having a healthy relationship with them.
It all comes back to awareness. And like Nir Eyal says, the antidote to impulsiveness is forethought. So start planning ahead, even in small ways. Take back control of your time and attention.
And remember, it's a journey, not a race. So be patient, be kind to yourself, and celebrate those little victories along the way.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us today, everyone. Now go out there and reclaim your time.